The Renewable Energy Dialogues were proudly brought to you by Thebe Investment Corporation. Building communities, our bottom line.
Hello and welcome to the special discussion on fueling the growth of the region. I'm Nozipho Mbanjwa. Now, government has identified energy security as the single most important challenge that must be prioritized and addressed effectively to jumpstart our economy. Sub-Saharan African economies have been seeing exciting growth in the past years, but if these growths are to be sustained, the requisite fundamentals need to be in place, and key to this is securing energy supply. What are the things we need to do and address in order to get to a place where there is enough energy? In studio to help me answer this question, amongst others, I'm joined by Ompie Aphane. He's the Deputy Director General responsible for energy policy and planning, and this at the Department of Energy. Sizwe Mncwango, he is the Interim Chief Executive at Thebe Energy and Resources, and Bonang Mohale, the Chairman of Shell South Africa, rather. We're also joined by a live studio audience, and for you at home, if you want to participate in this conversation, you can certainly do that. That's on Twitter, using, of course, the hashtag Thebe410. That's THEBE 410. Gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Bonang, let's start off with some context-setting questions. Put together for us the relationship, of course, between the reliability of energy supply and economic growth, and the importance of this for the region.
Nozi, thank you very much for having me. So first and foremost, the World Energy Council often refers to energy as a third means of production. Energy is a direct stimulant towards economic growth, because when the economy is growing, then it allows countries to be able to meet their ultimate objectives. Without energy, as evidenced by the current challenges, it affects directly the GDP growth of countries.
A direct stimulant of growth, that's the analysis we're getting from Bonang. Ompie, let me come to you with regards to the environment to enable that stimulus to take place. How would you describe the progress of African governments in the region to create a conducive environment for investment into energy supply?
Thanks, Nozi. I think as a start, there is recognition that the adequate energy resources, primary energy resources in the region. I think there's been a lot more data collection around the extent to which the various African countries, South Africa being one of them, have various primary energy sources, be it coal, be it gas, all these other carriers, renewable energy sources and so on. So that's a starting point to recognize what you have, and then ultimately to find programs to convert that primary energy into what could be called energy carriers. In other words, it's not so much the resource only, it's also the electricity or the petrol in the car or the liquefied petroleum gas that you use for space heating and cooking and so forth. So you need to be able to convert the primary energy through various technologies, through some infrastructure development up to the end user. And that whole value chain is very critical for governments to get together, and make sure that they're coherent and they're conducive for investment at the various elements.
So we'll come back to address whether that recognition of convergence, that recognition of having to invest into infrastructure is actually taking priority in the fiscus of these various governments. But Sizwe, let's come to you, and I want to harp on you because I've picked up a very interesting concept or phrase that Thebe has come up with, and you're calling it the energy trilemma. Unpack what this concept means and what its relevance for the region is.
Sure. The matter of the energy trilemma, it's really looking at energy on three challenges, or energy on three forces. The topic today is about energy supply. My colleague here is talking about energy supply adequacy. We have a responsibility. In fact, in South Africa, the issue of supply is a constitutional right. So people have a constitutional right to energy. So the first issue on the trilemma is supply. But it can't be supply at all cost. We still have an environment to protect. So the second issue on the trilemma really is about sustainability in the environment and ensuring that our kids can live and breathe much fresh air compared to what we are currently experiencing with coal emissions and stuff like that. And then the third leg of the trilemma essentially is about what is called energy equity. It's about accessibility of energy. 15% of South Africans still don't have access to electricity. But it's a way, way, way much improved compared to pre-1994, where almost 65% of South Africans did not have access to electricity.
So 3 very important concepts that you're putting on the table that we'll get to: the supply and demand dynamics, sustainability and equity. But I want to throw the ball back to Bonang, and I want you to pick up on the initial comments that Ompie has made. As a player in the sector, what would be your description of the way African governments and SADC governments in particular have come to the fore in terms of ensuring that the policy and the regulatory environment is conducive to do business in?
Whilst we acknowledge that a lot has happened and progress has been made, the facts are still proving to us that we still need to do more. For instance, of the 1.4 billion people, out of the 7 billion that have absolutely no form of access to energy whatsoever, more than half of them are found in Africa. And yet this continent is the one that is blessed more than any other, especially with renewables. For instance, hydro, the mighty Zambezi, as one of the 3 major rivers in the world, has enough force to be able to generate electricity for the whole of 1.1 billion people that are found in Africa, and still have access to be able to import it to Europe. But sadly, this is where energy access, security and sustainability is challenged at the most.
Where's
when
the
you come
problem,
to
Bonang? I mean, and it goes back to the conversion issue. You're saying that we have an abundance of these natural resources. So what's the bottleneck? Why are we not seeing that conversion?
So the challenge is, again, the type of thoughtful, deliberate, purposeful infrastructure investment in those means that are going to aid production, therefore stimulate economic growth, so that we can then offer service delivery to our people. That's where we have been lacking. So investment has really been a challenge. But also, even when you look at it in terms of foreign direct investment point of view, Africa only attracts 1% of the global FDI. And then lastly, Africa, again, of all other continents, today Germany is the world authority on solar energy. But the sun is actually in Africa. They have 3 months of sun. Here we have, if we are unlucky, 11 months of electricity. And yet our research and development and institutions of higher learning are not spending as much time, energy and effort on just researching, harnessing and utilizing. And one could say exactly the same about wind, for instance.
Right. So you've pinpointed infrastructure investment in particular as a key challenge. I don't doubt for a second, Ompie, that this is a challenge that the government recognizes and that has received considerable attention from a policy perspective. In your view, what is keeping potential long-term investors in energy infrastructure at arm's length from the region?
From a regional perspective, we've seen examples, that range from what represents an ideal and conducive environment for investment, but that's also in contrast to other examples that we can refer to. And let me give an example again from latching onto what Bonang was raising with the even bigger river, the Congo River, right? There's been, that's energy, right? It's just not in the form that could be used by me and you in the house or in industry and so on. And for over 70 years, there has not been an adequate level of collaboration, an adequate level of, if you like, institutional and regulatory mechanisms put in place in order to harness the power of that river. So that's an example where collaboration between, various governments becomes very critical. And to try and get the coherence between the various regulatory and policy positions, right, in an governmental kind of way has proven very tricky for us as a continent and perhaps as a sub-region in the Southern African Development Corporation, a community rather. But then within South Africa, we've also seen other examples, where exploration, of the hydrocarbon resources that we believe we have. You've heard about the shale gas, example, is that much as it might have been evident for a very long time that it exists out there as a resource, our ability to attract investment to go explore, to make sure that we're able to, quantify it and then convert it and monetize it, has proven very difficult because of the lack of
Allow me to be cheeky. If anything else, we possibly even losing investors because of regulatory uncertainty with shale exploration. And Bonang, we'll get to your insights on that. But one of the things that Ompie has raised, and I want to bring this to you, Sizwe, he's spoken about collaboration quite a bit in that insight that he's given us. And there's collaboration amongst governments, which we'll talk about at a regional integration level, but there's collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. Now, do PPPs make financial sense for private sector players in the energy space in the region? Is there enough of a financial incentive to want to put your money behind these projects?
Absolutely, but I just need to first emphasize one of my colleagues' points here. Why are we seeming like we have not exploited these resources to the fullest? I think we have to recognize the context that we come from a dark continent, and we've done a lot of hard work in terms of just politically liberating the continent. I think we are now at the right time, at the right place to take the next step around economic liberation. I think the policy framework that we currently have, especially in South Africa, is the right machinery to ensure that there is structure, there is order. So the IPP framework, or the renewable energy policy framework, really ensures that there is structure, there is order. As we exploit these resources, there is equity in the exploitation of the resources.
What about the pace, Sizwe? If we look at the pace of demographics and the pace of which demand is outstripping supply, we might be at the right place in terms of we've got the policies cast in stone and we've refined them, but are we moving forward at the requisite pace?
The pace will always be too slow. I guarantee you the pace is very slow. I mean, if you look at the pace in Nigeria, Nigeria kind of 170 million people, their energy generation capacity is less than a quarter of Eskom's generation capacity. And we still sit here as South Africans and complain about the 15%. So the pace is very slow. 1 billion people are surviving on only 28 gigawatts of electricity in the continent. South Africa, with about 50 million people, surviving on about 44 gigawatts of electricity. The pace is very slow, especially for Africa. Bonang was talking about 1.2 billion people. There's just a lot of people who don't have access to electricity.
And we'll come back to the Nigerian example because they've also tried to move ahead in terms of their own power sector reforms and whether there are lessons for the region from that. But I want you to quickly maybe come back to that initial question of whether public-private partnerships in the energy sector make financial sense for potential investors and industry players to put their money behind them.
They make great sense because they are underpinned by a very excellent policy framework, especially in the South African context. The policy framework really incentivizes private participation. You look at the subscriptions in round 1 of the IPP framework, round 2, round 3, Ompie can tell you, all those 3, in fact even round 4, were oversubscribed because the public knows that it can't really have this animal all by itself. We have to invite private sector participation. We have to invite competitiveness. Private sector, we all know that it brings a lot of competitiveness, and we have to ensure then that the private sector gets the right and fair reward. And the policy is well structured to bring in a lot of people who are interested.
Do you share those sentiments, Bonang, that the incentives are right, that it makes financial sense, and that if you're looking at this particular region, you're in for a good return?
So first of all, we need to embed the notion that capital is mobile and it is looking for the best returns and attractive terms what we have seen in South Africa is that we could be more deliberate about regulatory certainty and stability. For instance, Ompie referred to this God-given resource of shale gas. And for 6 years, we have been grappling with this python, and we chose the most convoluted and conflicting way of reviewing a 2002 Mining Petroleum Resources Development Act. And in 6 years, we still have not issued licenses in the Karoo. As if that's not enough, we then lump a 150-year-old mining industry that is established, the risks are known, can be fully mitigated, with an industry that is yet to be nascent, oil and gas, and we wanting to brush them with the same stroke. As we speak today, the companies that had shown an amazing appetite to invest, to explore, to take risks on this continent have been unable to because we still have not issued exploration rights agreements. Lastly, when you look at really the need of the continent as articulated by Sizwe, this is the continent that needs to be moving forward deliberately with a lot of speed, especially because we say we stand for service delivery, and yet we are the ones that have been probably the slowest. And I think that's one thing that we need to lament. We speak about public-private partnerships. This country, I think, has an amazing model. The first PPP, 27th of June, 1996, at Inkosi Albe Lutuli Central Hospital, an amazing success. The health outcomes, absolutely mind-boggling. Why have we not replicated it in the other 147 health sectors just in KwaZulu-Natal? Why have we taken it to the other 8 provinces? And again, it's because sometimes we're not sure about whether we want to turn left 1 degree or right 3 degrees.
So we're not sure whether we want to turn left 1 degree, I think it is, and right 9 degrees. And Ompie, you were very forthright in highlighting the fact that the pace of harmonizing and integrating the regulatory frameworks in the region and the policies that govern the sector are not going at the pace that one would have desired. But let's bring it closer to home and let's address this sore point, I think, that Bonang raises about the inability to issue licenses, and that in itself hindering and even turning away foreign direct investment to other markets. Why are we not getting this right?
I think we must take comfort in the fact that there is, an understanding of what needs to be done, as a starting point. It's not like there's no recognition, it's not like we completely lost this, what needs to be done, because there are pockets of excellent practice that just needs to, permeate other areas within the same energy space, because it's very sectoral. We talk about energy broadly, but I mean, the regulatory model that applies to electricity is different to gas, different to petroleum, and so on and so forth. And then we also have, different, if you like, institutional arrangements. Bonang made mention about a province, so you might find certain best practice in a certain sector not actually having, filtered across to other sectors. And I think for that to happen, it's a process, and there needs to be some, if you like, some amalgamation of all of these practices to root out things that do not work and to latch onto those that everybody agrees this is the best way of going. So it's a coordination process that is unfolding, and I think the pace could be faster. I agree with that. The
pace could definitely be faster. I want to go back to independent power producers and the broader reforms that we've seen in the energy sector. Sizwe, I want to bring you in on this. Now, one of the contentious issues has always been around the tariffs and whether the tariffs makes financial sense for IPPs who want to participate in the sector, and whether we have a developmental mandate that we need to be cognizant of as we set those tariffs. What's your take on the power play in that debate?
I think the power play has really taken its direction and its course. There was a lot of uncertainty, especially around round 1. And people would price the risk and they would price the uncertainty. So the round one tariffs from a PPA point of view were relatively high. I think technologies were not proven, technologies are known. Round two, we saw the prices going down. And as the prices keep going further down in round three and in round four, it augurs well there for the man on the street, it augurs well for affordability, it augurs well for accessibility, but people are becoming more and more confident on technology issues. They are more and more confident on their ability to recover from a PPA point of view, because the tariffs are guaranteed and their income is guaranteed by National Treasury. So technology is also improving, and technology on the ground, we can see that from a solar point of view, whether it's wind or any other form of renewable energy. So insofar as the tariffs issues are concerned, we are moving, I mean, the Eskom Mega Flex tariff is about 65 cents as we speak. The renewables are still higher. As you build more on the Eskom side, you're moving towards a rand. The renewables are also moving down towards a rand from about 2 rands. So we are really moving much, much closer to a convergence where the most expensive form of electricity, the renewable energy, intermittent, is now coming much closer to the base load kind of electricity production. So we've done very well.
Can we take this model into the region? And South Africa gets the headlines and the recognition for its stance on renewable energy and the reprogram and how it's taken off. Are we at a point where we can say we've more or less solidified the model, we can now begin to export it to our regional neighbors?
Without being controversial, I mean, starting here at home, people believe we can take this model into e-tolls, for example, I think.
Ompie is laughing, straight out laughing at this suggestion.
But Ompie is the author and the architect of this whole model and the whole brains behind the renewable energy IPP program. People really believe that it's worked very well in electricity generation, and we can expand it to various sectors in South Africa, for example. It's a no-brainer, you know, taking this model across to any other country in the rest of Africa, and it begins to alleviate the pressures of 1 billion people who still don't have access to electricity.
A no-brainer that's going? Please come in on
I think, and Sizwe, I mustn't be immodest. I think Sizwe is, you know, I didn't pay him, right? So
I'm starting to doubt the relationship.
But I think, Nozi, more seriously, there are lessons to be taken into the sub-region. But interestingly, this is a model that is a, if you like, is a cannibalization of what happened in Western Europe with what they call feed-in tariffs, right? And they made billions of euros worth of mistakes, the Spanish, the Germans, and all of that. And they're looking at our model to see how they could tweak theirs in order to achieve the same levels of, because the objectives are very clear. It's more like, you mentioned energy security. We take it further. We say we want to create an industrial base in the country. We want to create jobs through that. We also want to make sure that, you know, the pricing, you know, or the costs of the program do not break the bank, so to speak. So if you take that kind of, you know, a scenario, it applies not only on the African continent, it applies everywhere else where they're facing the same energy challenges that we face. So there is a real effort to try and make sure that we replicate that, because our energy, unfortunately, our energy destiny is intertwined. It's not like you can have, you know, pockets. So ultimately, we're converging more and more as it's getting more and more integrated. And which we have here as the sun, Sizwe gave that example. We might want to, you know, harness more hydropower from Mozambique, you know, because it's complementary, right? And then we have certain other resources that others don't have. But as a, if you like, as an integrated system, one can maximize the value and reduce, you know, the costs and optimize accordingly.
Bonang, I want to bring Africa into this conversation when we're talking about replication and models. If we just look, to example, to Cote d'Ivoire, who privatized the sector far earlier than many other markets. Do you think that as the region, and maybe even as South Africa, we have looked north enough to look at African models that there might be bits and pieces from which we could replicate within these markets?
So first I need to agree with Sizwe that the architect is sitting on our extreme left for sure.
It's pure denial.
Number two, to say, I think it was General George Patton, for me, who said, great wars are won by good execution, not just by great planning, because good execution will save even a mediocre plan. So South Africa, we have to admit, we have got plans coming out of every orifice. Our biggest shortfall has been the doing part, the execution. So what are the things that are holding us back? So for me, a number of things. We need to be explicit if we want to solve our problems. So the first is we have inherited the capitalist system, but we refuse to manage it. Number two, we talk about public-private partnerships, and yet the distrust between government and business has never been greater. Number three, we also need to say, you know, South Africa's problems have nothing to do with the quantum of resources. I think we are blessed with every resource you can think of. The world's #1 gold producer. By choice, we now chose to be number 4. 85% of the world's production of platinum, and yet we are the price takers. Thirdly, this issue of not utilizing our resources, for me, has everything to do with our ability to manage. Just plan, lead, coordinate, and organize, not the availability of resources. You know, in business, we talk about project management. Project management is not a science. It's simply, can you deliver mega projects on time, on budget, and in full? That's where we are falling short. So we plan, we talk, and then when it comes to doing, we do nothing. We had in energy a 2008 white paper that told us that by 2007 we would run out of electricity. And we had a number of choices. 1st of January 2008 came, the first rolling blackouts in the history of this country hit us. Since 2008 up until now, we still have not figured out how we deal with these rolling blackouts. It still looks like a big surprise. Medupi is 5 years behind. Kusile will do the same thing. Inga will be the same thing. So until and unless we fix some of these systemic problems and then we partner with business, then we can move forward in space and in time. For me, a good example is, you know, South African breweries, SAB Miller, has twice as many as number of schools that we have. Said 30,000 schools, 64,000 shebeens. They deliver successfully twice a week to every single solitary one of these shebeens. We are yet to deliver once a year books to Limpopo, but we don't want to learn from the private sector.
Well, on that note, they say that great wars are won on execution. Welcome back to this special discussion on fueling the growth of the region. Still with me in studio, I have my guest Ompie, Aphane, the Deputy Director General for Energy Policy and Planning at the Department of Energy, and a reluctant one to take any recognition for the work that he's done thus far in the sector. We also have Sizwe Mncwango. He's the Interim Chief Executive for Thebe Energy and Resources, and some difficult words coming out from Bonang Mohale, the Chairman of Shell South Africa. Now we take the conversation to our live studio audience, and they're going to get an opportunity to engage with our panelists. Thank you for being here, and let's take our first question. Please, Bevan, go ahead.
Hi, Nosi, thanks. Hi, gentlemen. It's Bevan Jones from Thebe. I think, Ompie, if I can just direct the question to you, I think it's been a very interesting discussion about public-private participation, and it's definitely one of the key issues. But in this instance, in terms of power, we're asking Eskom to effectively be the single buyer of power. And, you know, their tariff is coming in at a megaflex rate, 70, 80 cents a kilowatt hour, and in certain instances they've had to buy at significantly higher than that, especially when they're having to purchase diesel, etc., for emergency generation. And power is obviously one of the most volatile commodities. In a day ahead, just before Eskom is about to load shed, they'd probably be prepared to pay 5 Rand a kilowatt hour in order not to load shed. Do we not need some sort of a market which can really start to address those issues, both the volatility of power prices and help to perhaps encourage public-private participation and perhaps move away from the complete reliance on Eskom as the single buyer? There's been a lot of talk about deregulating and, privatizing Eskom, splitting it up generation, transmission and distribution, and Eskom obviously should maintain the grid. And then the other thing is, do we need baseload coal-fired power, perhaps a little bit flippantly, now that Elon Musk has brought out his power wall and he can now give us a gigawatt, which can turn peak load solar power, which we have plenty of, into baseload power?
Thank you for that. A couple of questions in that one question. So we'll park them. Let's take another question from the floor. And I think it's Gugu right next to you. Gugu, please go ahead.
Okay. Gugu here from Ngube Investment Holdings. Also mine is directed to Ompie. You know, if we're talking fueling growth of the region and you think to yourselves that this country is majoritarily populated by females, it's disappointing when you notice that the play within the, you know, within our space is predominantly still male dominated. So my question really is around, you know, what is the department's plans and current implementations that are undertaking to really bring in women in helping to fuel the growth of our country?
I think there's quite a bit of substance to go around in these two questions. So let's take these, and I know it won't be lots of them at your door, but I think there's lots of insights that we can pick up from Sizwe and Bonang as well. Maybe let's start off with this idea of a market that is not dependent on a single buyer. Is this something that is a possibility in the South African future?
Government has looked at various models, including complete liberalization of the electricity sector, what we refer to as a day-ahead electricity market. And the bottom line is that for that to work effectively and efficiently, you need to have adequate reserve margin. So basically you need to have options, otherwise it gets captured, and certain of these generators could, you know, set prices in a manner that makes for manipulation. And we've seen examples. You might remember California about a decade ago, Greece, and all of that. So whilst there might be certain arguments for, I think from a South African context, you know, we best advise not to go down that route at this point. In the UK, you know, they were the pioneers, so they introduced the pool, the so-called pool, and they made a 27 billion, you know, pound sterling mistake before they converted to what they call the NITA. So we're not in that kind of, you know, position as a country to make those mistakes. It will really kill the country. But I think the second part of the question is perhaps maybe if I can link that to the one that was raised about women. Perhaps one of the reasons we're in such trouble is because of the extent to which we've neglected the gender aspect in the energy paradigm. I mean, it's the fact that we talk about energy, right? But there's the value chain, if you recall. So there's the production of energy, there's the end use, right? And the end use, you know, is what me and you are exposed to. So if the woman has to fetch wood in order to prepare a meal, in order for the children to study and so on, then we've lost it. Because the ramifications thereof are that we're providing, it's a self-serving kind of activity. We provide energy, but we don't know why we have to do these things and, you know, the cause and the effects thereof. And therefore, government has consciously taken a decision around mainstreaming the participation of women in various of the programs. I mean, you might be aware or not, there's, you know, the rollout of solar water heating, you know, it's targeting, you know, women and the youth in particular, in order to start addressing these things, you know, that us males cannot deal with as effectively as what women could. Yeah.
Sizwe, some confessions from the male fraternity coming through there. Wondering if you want to add your voice to that.
I wanted to add my voice on the free market liberalization, actually. I think we are not there yet, you know, given the strategic nature of energy in the region. We still need direct intervention by various state entities to actually ensure that those who were disenfranchised before can move up to the level where they have energy. where there is more supply than demand, then you can allow the free market economy to take its course. At the present moment, the market will be subject to manipulation by those who have, at the complete disadvantage of those who just don't have access to energy. So I think it's very critical that the direct state intervention and the energy issues, strategic because they are not just let loose because really those who have may take advantage of those who don't have.
Bonang, let's bring you in here because I think this conversation around a market that is fully liberalized, that doesn't allow for volatility in prices is getting quite a bit of attention. You bring your voice to this.
Yeah, first I think a comment around the state of energy, especially as it pertains to just the one utility, which is Eskom. And to make a comment that I think Eskom's leadership and management is totally and absolutely capable to deal with their challenges. The challenges that we have are sitting slightly higher and really a triumvirate of challenges. So the first is the issue around the going concern status of Eskom. Secondly, it's about this notion of planned and preventative maintenance in any industry, which is an absolute standard. Thirdly, it's an issue around governance stroke leadership. For instance, the rule clarity and definition between the shareholder, whose job it is to appoint a board that it trusts, and then leave that board alone. Then the board's job is to employ a CEO that is capable, effective, and efficient. And that's where their job ends. So that the CEO can then put a team that would make it easy for him to be finally accountable without this undue interference. The period leading up to 2010, why we neglected deliberately, purposefully, this planned and preventative maintenance, when in any industry, even in your own car, you know that if you don't service it regularly, if this thing was meant to live for 10 years, you run it to death, you're shortening its life. And today we probably have this gap purely and simply because we didn't pay enough attention to that one. Lastly then, around the commodity prices and the issue of gender, I couldn't agree more. How do you hope to go to economic war and you leave 54% of the population behind and still think that you will be successful? Especially in a world that is ultra competitive. This competition is on steroids. In a world where we have just seen a below $50 per barrel oil price, that makes long-term capital investment a huge issue of concern, where all international oil companies have had to take drastic action. And coming again to how does an entity budget 2 billion rands to use to buy diesel purely for peak and then end up spending 10 billion on baseload, and they're allowed to get away with it. And yet we know in the 60s, Mosgas and Sukor are the ones that found that there is gas in the Karoo. And the national oil company, Petro SA, has been producing 57,000 barrels of GTL a day, every day, based on this gas. And up until today, we have not found a way to harness this God-given resource in a manner that will improve the quality of lives of the majority of people. It's just beyond me.
It's beyond many, I think, in the room. But let's maybe go back to the audience. I want to make sure that we capture as many voices as possible. Do I have another question coming from the floor? Yes, please, sir.
Yeah. My name is Ompie. I'm from Wits University. Ompie, given that you're an architect of the energy sector, unfortunately, you have to go for this one. Bonang earlier mentioned that we are blessed with primary assets, being one, coal being an asset, given that 90% in excess of electricity currently is coal-based. And however, the unfortunate is that mineral assets are non-renewable. And Bonang mentioned that we used to be the world gold producer. I think we even dropped to 7th after Peru, for the fact that our gold gets deeper. But the same with coal, has been good to us, but it's non-renewable. And if one looks at the integrated resource plan, how realistic it is and at what cost, given talking about solar, talking about nuclear, compared to coal, which is relatively cheaper and which has relatively being a more mature industry. Talking about coal to liquid electricity, we are having a mature industry. So how do we deal with that? And maybe not to lash to the second question to say, yes, you could compare with developed countries like Germany, how they've introduced non-renewable. However, in a developing economy like South Africa, one needs to be realistic when we are facing with the triple evils of inequality, poverty, to say how realistic those models can be replicated in South Africa.
Paul, thank you for those questions. Do I have another question from the floor that we'll take in this round? Yes, please, please introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah. My name is Thebe. I'm from Thebe. I think I've got, two questions. One to Ompie and probably two. I know, Nozipho, you said we shouldn't make it to, we should make to one single person, but it's going to be for both Sizwe and Bonang, coming from the private sector.
You're very close to breaking the rules,
Right,
but go ahead.
but I think all of them are related to regional integration.
Yeah.
I think from you, Ompie, I mean, if you start talking to a few people within the region, I think one of the issues they say is that as a region, we're not integrated yet. I mean, we seem to be very much focused on our own problems, while if you look at energy is a regional issue, and therefore they believe should be resolved through regional integration. I think my question is, in your deliberations, how far have you seen and how much have you seen this integration actually come into place? Now, the second question, still related to integration, to both Sizwe and Bonang, is very much around how far have we as a private sector been willing to move out of our own, say, South Africa, and look at the region and actually go out there and play a bigger part in creating this, in managing this regional issue.
Thank you, Boitumelo, for that. I think there's quite a bit of meat that we can take off some of these questions. Regional integration and also private sector opportunities for being part of the solution to energy provision. Again, Ompie, most of them at your door. So let me give you first shot, and then we will cascade.
Yeah, if I can perhaps start by addressing the question relating to coal and the choices that face us. It's a balancing act. So you have to try and keep energy prices, right, as affordable as possible by managing the costs. There is an issue around the financial costs relating to electricity generated from coal as against the economic costs thereof. Right? And we mustn't lose that argument in a way that suggests that because this is what it is sold at, the impact of air quality in Mpumalanga, right, we must discount. Right? So the whole idea is to find a happy mix between all of these options. We refer to that as the energy mix, because it balances the objectives. We say we want to keep the cost down, we want to diversify, regional integration plays a role there. We want to reduce water consumption, right? That's a very critical issue that you might be blindsided to if it's not as highlighted as what it should be in relation to coal electricity. Right? So there's a lot of water that goes into that, and more we're becoming constrained, and therefore explore all of these other options is the logical way to go. So coal plays a role, right? But side by side with that, you have to introduce other energy carriers, particularly if you're endowed with those resources, and it makes logical sense.
And as an extension to that, he spoke about comparing South Africa to other markets and having to put on our developmental hat when we do that.
Yeah, and that's precisely why we have been so lucky that we've managed to go down that learning rate insofar as the renewables are concerned. Because the traditional argument is renewables are very expensive, and this is what happens out in Europe and the developed world. And we've proven in this country that the wind in the Eastern and Western Cape and the solar, the resource in the Northern Cape, we can create, and no disrespect to Bonang, but like a Sasol model for our own country, in terms of which we harness the technology and we really industrialize, you know, on a level that had never been achieved. Just in respect to with respect to the other question that was raised, I think it was Mpho. If I understood the question, and I'm struggling a little bit because.
So Mpho spoke about the integrated resource plan that you've addressed and the developing economy hat, and then Boitumelo raised the issues around integration and where the private sector was also playing its role in terms of taking the opportunities available in the region.
Yes, I was going to say that we're focusing a lot on electricity, but in other sectors, right, and you might have heard about the gas discoveries in Mozambique and Tanzania and so on. And it's a tragedy, and I think this is a point that, you know, Bonang was making earlier on, that, you know, on the eastern coast of this continent, sub-region, our region, right, Angola coming down, and on the, you know, sorry, that was the west, on the and on the Tanzanian side and so on, right. There are so many collaboration opportunities outside of electricity. And the idea is that the Mozambicans will have the resource, but we are a logical market. We're next door, we have complementary, you know, needs and so on. So we could use that outside of the electricity in order to, you know, to integrate more and more, so that they don't have to learn or to go through the same learnings that we have. You know, they take advantage of them rather than experience them the same way that we have. And that way we'll be able to, you know, I suppose, grow the regional economy much faster than what we're doing.
Bonang, you're nodding throughout the answer that Ompie is giving with regards to the regional economy that we should also be creating. What role for the private sector to ensure that that happens?
Yeah, so this lack of integration or optimum integration, how does it manifest? For instance, 1992, we signed the Yamoussoukro Declaration in Aviation to open our skies. Today is 2015, we're still talking about it. This quarter alone, 378,000 people flew through London Heathrow when all they wanted to do was fly east to west and vice versa, purely because we have not been able to integrate the two. Thirdly, for me, I think the role that we can play as the private sector is to be led, especially by South African companies that have taken the lead in going to the rest of the continent. The MTNs of this world, the Checkers of this world, who have really, even the Sasols that have now become global companies, in really going to the region. But I think in going to the region, we need to humble ourselves and learn and go to those markets in their own terms, utilizing the skills and the resources that are found in those markets, so that we are not perceived as neo-colonizers. Lastly, around the issue of can we learn more from the resources that are found in the region? Definitely. I think Mozambique, when they found, including Namibia, the Kudu and the Mbande gas fields, today when you go to Secunda 2, Sasol, 65% of that gas comes from Mozambique, and that pipeline was built again by the leadership of Sasol. So really we can learn instead of all of us wanting to do things on our own. By pulling our resources together, I think from the NEPAT initiatives driven by the 5 presidents, it was driven with great energy and enthusiasm, and we seem to be removing the foot off the accelerator pedal. Thank you.
I do want us, before we wrap up the show, to also maybe bring our voices to a little bit of a contentious issue that we've been seeing unfolding in South Africa. And this is the development of a narrative that we've seen through the Soweto protests, that there are options to payment when it comes to energy. And Sizwe, I'm going to put you on the spot and just get a sense of how are you digesting and making sense of what we're seeing coming out of some of the townships in reaction to what they believe is an unfair cost to them?
Sure, there are options to payment, and I may sound middle classish, by so saying. I did earlier on highlight the issue of balancing the issues of affordability and accessibility. The state is pretty much aware, and it does grant a basic minimum amount of electricity to those who cannot afford. Saving electricity and being efficient on electricity then becomes an issue after you've been given your initial allocation to save and minimize your cost or your burden to payment. There is no other alternative as we begin to look at the privatization of this sector, as you look at the IPPs coming up and the PPPs coming up. People are, I think it came out from one of the audiences here, that people are looking for a return in their investment. Obscene return? No, we can't afford that, because we are still a developing state, and we're a state that needs to take along a lot of other people to ensure that by the time we reach maturity, everyone can participate in the economy and we can all get better. So there is a phased approach really around the payment issues. And we must be sensitive to someone who is 65 and they cannot afford, how we ensure that they have a constitutional right called electricity access, and that right does accrue to them.
In less than 30 seconds, Ompie, as we begin to wrap up, I want you to bring your voice to this discussion around some of the protests that you're seeing. And what I'm hearing from Sizwe is a sensitivity to the developmental mandate and the affordability for those who can't afford. What is the government's official stance on this?
I think in the first instance, you need to recognize that there is a need for cross-subsidies. So there has to be a poverty net to cover those that are indigent and that are not able to afford the services. That's the first one. The second point is that you need to be able to isolate those that can pay and are just playing a truant, game here from those that are not able to afford. So there's a need for making a distinction between those. And then I think lastly, there is that issue around what the appropriate level of service charges should be relative to the service offering.
So there's appropriateness and distinction as two concepts coming from Ompie. A quick remark, Bonang, on this issue.
So to add on what they've already said, it's not sustainable to look at the 3.5 million inhabitants of Soweto only as a crucible for votes. One of our developmental mandates has to be driven by the notion that says, like a good parent, we need to love a lot, but expect a lot. Isn't it amazing that those teachers that have high expectations of their pupils do well? So Soweto ought to be taught through the narratives that are consistent, starting with the biggest stakeholder, which is government, to say the nations that depend only on their rights, they perish. But those that depend on their responsibilities and their rights, they thrive. So here we create a culture that says you can consume electricity for 21 years, but have absolutely no expectation of pay. How do we create people that have pride, have self-esteem, that can stand on their 2 feet, except just swelling the 11 million people on the queues of people who are depending on some sort of social security? Surely that's not what we struggled for.
Surely that is not what we struggled for. And the audience loves the closing comments. And unfortunately, we have reached the end of this discussion on fueling the growth of the region. It certainly has been insightful. It's been robust. And in fact, we've also had some difficult conversations, but they've all been solutions orientated. A very big thank you to my panelists. That's Ompie Aphane, Deputy Director General responsible for Energy Policy and Planning. This at the Department of Energy. Sizwe Mncwango, the Interim Chief Executive at Thebe Energy and Resources, and of course Bonang Mohale, the Chairman for Shell South Africa. And of course a big thank you to our studio audience for their input. For myself, Nozipho Mbanjwa, it's goodbye. Thank you very much, guys.